The cameras were rolling, the audience was cheering, and then 73-year-old Dorothy Chen stood at the Family Feud podium, beside her 16-year-old grandson Marcus, her hands trembling slightly as she fought against the growing confusion that had begun to cloud moments that should have been crystal clear. Her eyes holding the desperate awareness of someone who could feel their memories slipping away like sand through fingers, while surrounded by the faces of people she loved, but sometimes struggled to recognize. When Steve Harvey asked about your biggest fear, Dorothy's response, delivered with the heartbreaking honesty of someone watching their own mind betray them, would reveal what it means to face the gradual erasure of a lifetime of experiences while trying to create final moments of connection with the family who defined her entire world. "Forgetting my family," Dorothy had said, her voice carrying the weight of 18 months spent living with early-stage Alzheimer's disease while watching her granddaughter's wedding slip from her memory within days and struggling to remember conversations with the people she loved most, even as those conversations were happening. "I have Alzheimer's, and I can feel my memories disappearing. I'm terrified that one day I'll look at Marcus and not know who he is." The studio had fallen into a profound and respectful silence, as everyone present tried to understand what it would mean to feel your own identity and connections dissolving, while remaining aware enough to grieve the loss of everything that had defined your life, your relationships, and your sense of self. Dorothy Chen had been diagnosed with early-stage Alzheimer's disease 14 months earlier, after a series of increasingly concerning memory lapses and cognitive changes had prompted her family to seek medical evaluation. The diagnosis had been devastating, but it also provided an explanation for the confusion, disorientation, and memory problems that had been frightening Dorothy and her family for over a year. Alzheimer's disease is a progressive neurological disorder that causes brain cells to degenerate and die, resulting in a continuous decline in thinking, behavioral, and social skills that severely affects a person's ability to function independently. In the early stages, people with Alzheimer's often retain awareness of their condition while experiencing the terrifying reality of watching their cognitive abilities decline. Dorothy's Alzheimer's symptoms had begun subtly, with occasional forgetfulness about recent conversations, difficulty remembering names of familiar people, and trouble following complex instructions. But over the months since her diagnosis, the symptoms had progressed to include more significant short-term memory loss, confusion about time and place, difficulty with familiar tasks, and episodes where she would forget important family events or struggle to recognize people she had known for decades. The most devastating aspect of Dorothy's condition was her maintained awareness of what was happening to her mind. Unlike later stages of Alzheimer's where consciousness may become clouded, Dorothy remained fully aware that she was losing memories, struggling with cognitive tasks, and gradually losing the ability to connect with her family in ways that had defined their relationships for decades. Dorothy had been the matriarch of a large, close-knit family, known for her sharp wit, detailed memory of family history, and ability to organize gatherings that brought together multiple generations. She had been the keeper of family stories, the coordinator of holidays and celebrations, and the emotional center around which her children and grandchildren had oriented their lives. Her kitchen had been the gathering place for Sunday dinners that could include 20 or more family members. Her photo albums were meticulously organized, chronicles of decades of birthdays, graduations, and milestones. And her memory had been the family's repository of stories about ancestors, traditions, and shared experiences that connected past and present. The impact of Alzheimer's on Dorothy's role within her family had been profound and heartbreaking for everyone involved. She had begun forgetting important family events shortly after they occurred, had started repeating stories and questions, and had gradually lost the ability to manage the complex social and logistical coordination that had made her the family's central figure. The woman who had once remembered everyone's birthday, anniversary, and favorite foods was now struggling to recall conversations from the same day, becoming confused about which grandchild was which, and losing track of family relationships that had been the cornerstone of her identity. The progression of Dorothy's symptoms had been irregular and unpredictable, with some days when her memory and cognitive function seemed almost normal, and other days when confusion and disorientation dominated her experience. This fluctuation had been particularly challenging for the family, as it created false hope during good periods and renewed grief when symptoms worsened. Dorothy herself found the inconsistency deeply unsettling, never knowing from day to day whether she would wake up with clear memories or struggle to remember where she was. Marcus, Dorothy's 16-year-old grandson, had been particularly affected by watching his grandmother's cognitive decline. Dorothy had been his primary caregiver during his childhood when his parents were working, and she had been the family member who had taught him to cook, had helped him with homework, and had shared stories about their family's history and values. Their bond had been especially close, built on thousands of hours spent together in Dorothy's kitchen, working in her garden, and listening to her tales about their Chinese heritage and the family's immigration story. The relationship between Dorothy and Marcus had become even more precious as her condition progressed, with both of them aware that their time for creating meaningful memories was limited. Marcus had taken on increasing responsibility for Dorothy's care and had become adept at gently redirecting her when she became confused, helping her remember important information and finding ways to connect with her even when her memory was unclear. He had learned to treasure moments of clarity when his grandmother seemed like herself again, while also accepting the reality that these moments were becoming less frequent and might eventually disappear entirely. The Family Feud application had been Marcus's idea, submitted with the hope that participating in a positive, engaging activity with his grandmother might create a joyful experience that could be preserved even if Dorothy's memory of it faded. He had also thought that appearing on television might create a permanent record of their relationship and Dorothy's personality that could be treasured by the family, regardless of how her condition progressed. Most importantly, he had wanted to give his grandmother one more opportunity to feel successful, valued, and celebrated before Alzheimer's robbed her of the cognitive abilities that had always made her feel proud and capable. Dorothy's cognitive abilities fluctuated from day to day and even hour to hour, with some periods when her memory and thinking were relatively clear and others when confusion and disorientation were more prominent. On good days, she could engage in complex conversations, remember recent events, and function relatively independently. On difficult days, she might struggle to remember her address, forget conversations from earlier in the day, or become confused about where she was or what year it was. These fluctuations made it impossible to predict how she would respond to new situations or whether she would be able to participate fully in planned activities. The emotional impact of living with Alzheimer's awareness had been enormous for Dorothy. She experienced daily grief for the memories she had lost and anxiety about the cognitive abilities she continued to lose. She had moments of panic when she couldn't remember important information, periods of sadness when she realized she had forgotten significant family events, and frustration when her mind wouldn't cooperate with tasks that had once been effortless. The awareness that her condition would only worsen over time had created an underlying sense of urgency about making the most of whatever cognitive function remained. Dorothy had also struggled with maintaining her sense of identity and autonomy as her cognitive abilities declined. She had been an independent, capable woman who had managed a household, raised children, and been a source of strength for others. The growing need for assistance with daily tasks and decision-making had been difficult to accept and had created additional stress about her changing role within the family. Tasks that had once been automatic, managing finances, organizing events, even following recipes she had made hundreds of times, now required help or had become impossible to complete successfully. The family's approach to Dorothy's Alzheimer's had been focused on maintaining her dignity, maximizing her remaining abilities, and creating as many positive experiences as possible while she could still enjoy them. They had made modifications to her living environment to enhance safety and reduce confusion, had developed routines and strategies to support her memory, and had prioritized spending quality time together while meaningful interaction was still possible. They had also made the difficult decision to document family stories and traditions while Dorothy could still share them, recognizing that her role as the family historian was irreplaceable and that this knowledge would be lost forever when her memory failed completely. During the pre-show preparations for Family Feud, Dorothy had been excited and engaged, clearly enjoying the novel experience and the opportunity to participate in something special with Marcus. The production team had been briefed about her condition and had been patient with her occasional need for clarification or repetition of instructions. Dorothy had been having a relatively good day cognitively, which had allowed her to understand the game format and participate meaningfully in the family's strategy discussions. The game had been proceeding with Dorothy participating as much as her cognitive abilities allowed, clearly drawing on her lifetime of general knowledge and experience, even when her short-term memory created challenges. The Chen family was competing against the Rodriguez family from California, and while both sides had been playing enthusiastically, there was something particularly poignant about watching Dorothy enjoy what might be one of her final opportunities to participate in such an activity. But when it came time for the category Your Biggest Fear, and it was Dorothy's turn at the buzzer, the question had struck directly at the heart of her daily reality, with a progressive disease that was slowly but inevitably erasing everything that had defined her life and relationships. Steve Harvey had approached the podium with his usual warm energy, but something about Dorothy's gentle confusion and the protective way Marcus was watching had made him immediately more careful and respectful than usual. "All right, Mrs. Chen," Steve had said gently. "Your biggest fear, what comes to mind?" Dorothy had looked at Marcus, then back at Steve, her expression showing the mixture of clarity and confusion that characterized her daily experience with Alzheimer's. "Forgetting my family," Dorothy had said, her words carrying the immediate fear of someone living with the daily reality of memory loss. "I have Alzheimer's, and I can feel my memories disappearing. I'm terrified that one day I'll look at Marcus and not know who he is." The studio had become completely quiet as everyone present understood that they were witnessing someone courageously facing one of humanity's most feared experiences, the gradual loss of memory and identity, while remaining aware of what was being lost. Steve had paused, clearly moved by Dorothy's courage in sharing her deepest fear so openly. "Mrs. Chen," Steve had said with infinite gentleness, "that must be incredibly frightening. How do you handle living with that fear?" "I try to focus on right now," Dorothy had replied with surprising wisdom and clarity. "I can't control what I'll remember tomorrow, but I can pay attention to what's happening today. That's why being here with Marcus matters so much." The studio audience had listened with obvious emotion as they witnessed wisdom and courage in the face of devastating loss. "Marcus," Steve had said, turning to Dorothy's grandson, "how has this affected your relationship with your grandmother?" "It's taught me that love is stronger than memory," Marcus had said, his voice thick with emotion. "Even when Grandma forgets things, she never forgets that she loves us, and we never stop loving her." Steve had looked back at Dorothy, who was clearly moved by Marcus's words, even if she might struggle to remember them later. "Mrs. Chen," Steve had said, "Marcus is right. Love creates connections that go deeper than memory. Even if your mind forgets, your heart remembers." Steve had begun removing his suit jacket, understanding that this moment required recognition of Dorothy's courage and the profound love between her and Marcus. "Mrs. Chen," Steve had said, placing the jacket around her shoulders, "this jacket represents something very special today. It represents the understanding that love creates memories stronger than any disease can erase, and that the connections we build with family exist in places that Alzheimer's cannot reach." Dorothy had pulled the jacket closer, clearly touched by the gesture and the recognition of her struggle. Steve had turned to address the studio audience. "Ladies and gentlemen," Steve had announced, "Dorothy Chen is facing one of life's greatest challenges with incredible courage and wisdom. She's showing us that even when memory fails, love endures, and that the most important connections we have with family exist in our hearts, not just our minds." The game had resumed with increased tenderness and appreciation for the present moment, as everyone understood they were witnessing a precious interaction between a grandmother and grandson whose time together was limited by circumstances beyond their control. When Steve had asked the final question about things that last forever, Dorothy had answered with surprising clarity: the love between family members, even when everything else fades away. The episode aired 2 months later and became a powerful tribute to family love in the face of Alzheimer's disease. Alzheimer's advocacy organizations used Dorothy and Marcus's story to help families understand the importance of creating meaningful experiences while cognitive abilities remain, and to show that connection and love can persist even as memory fails. Dorothy's family had kept the jacket and the video recording of their appearance, playing it regularly for Dorothy as her condition progressed. More importantly, the experience had reminded them to focus on creating present-moment connections rather than grieving for abilities that were being lost. The jacket represented Dorothy's understanding that while Alzheimer's might steal memories, it couldn't diminish the love that had defined her family relationships, and that some connections are so deep they exist in places that no disease can reach. Because that's what courage looks like when it faces the gradual erasure of a lifetime of memories. That's what love sounds like when it insists on connection despite cognitive loss. And that's what happens when a 73-year-old woman teaches everyone around her that the most important aspects of family relationships exist in the heart rather than the mind, and that love can create bonds stronger than any disease that tries to break them. Dorothy Chen was losing her memories to Alzheimer's disease, but on that day at Family Feud with Marcus, she showed that the love between family members transcends memory. That connection can exist even when recognition fails, and that some relationships are so profound they continue to nourish the heart even when the mind cannot recall the experiences that created them.